Yes, we're back on for another episode of the Play On Podcast, your favourite weekly fix of all things Scottish football. As always, I'm David Simmons, joined by Anthony Brown and Stephen Commons. Make sure you stay tuned for the next hour as we look back on the weekend's Scottish football in action, highlights and key talking points in the game. On tonight's show, we're discussing how do troubled Hearts get back on track. That's going to be our key talking point tonight, so make sure you stay tuned. As always, we want to hear from you guys though. We are fully live and interactive every week, so do get your comments coming in and discussions on any of the points that we are discussing on tonight's show. Don't forget as well, if you're watching via YouTube, then please get on and subscribe to the State of Mind YouTube channel. Also nip on over to Twitter and give the Play On Podcast show a little follow. Anthony, I'm going to start with you tonight, mate. I mean, Hearts, the key talking point. 13 points clear, top of the league. Why is there such an outcry at the club at the moment? How's it reached this situation?
That's a good question, because I guess you could go back 5 years, you could go back 2 years. It's very hard to pinpoint exactly where this started, this sort of rot that's, I don't know if you'd call it a rot, because that implies that it's been there constantly throughout, but there have been periods within that where Hearts have had good times. There was a period a couple of seasons ago when they were top of the league until November. They've obviously reached a couple of cup finals, so it's not like it's been constant, absolute constant negativity. There have been good periods within this general malaise. However, it feels like Hearts are in a real rut in terms of they've obviously been relegated last season. They're going to get promoted back up. That's the weird thing within all this. They are going to get promoted back up. They're now 13 points clear, even allowing for games in hand of their rivals. They're still effectively 10 points clear with 5 games to go. They're not going to blow that, not because Hearts are guaranteed to win 2 more games, but because the other teams are just not consistent enough to catch them. But the problem, there's 2 or 3 problems certainly within the current, if you're analysing the current season and what Robbie Nielsen's had to do with it. The first one, which reared its head earlier in the season, was this perceived style of play. That's been something that's plagued Robbie Nielsen throughout both his first reign at Hearts and his stint at Dundee United when he won the Championship relatively comfortable last season. And this season as well, it's been a bone of contention. Fairly or unfairly, everybody has their opinion on, because in the first half of the season, they were scoring a lot of goals, a level of goals that flies in the face of this being boring football. But there were a lot of Hearts supporters who were bored with the football. So the problem has been, since the turn of the year, there's been a real downturn in results and performances. It's sort of dropped in the first half of the season. They were still even when the performances weren't great, they were getting results. I think they won every game, 8 out of 9 league games, lost at Dunfermline, and they reached the Scottish Cup final, lost to Celtic on penalties. Obviously, they went out of the League Cup to Alloa, which was a shocker, but it was almost forgotten about because they nearly won the Scottish Cup a few weeks later. However, since the turn of the year, Hearts have been an absolute disaster on the pitch. They've I trace this current little period of demise, or whatever you would call it, back to the Dundee game at Dens Park when they lost 2-1. Was it 2-1 or 3-1?
Dens it was.
I
think it was 2-1.
2-1. Yeah, they were they had a really bad night then, and they've never really rediscovered their poise since then. They had one big win at Wraith Rovers, 4-0, but apart from that, they've been pretty terrible right throughout the last 3 months, from the start of January till now, the end of March. They've won a few games within that, but they've generally been scraped 1-0s, and then the goals have come late. It's not been convincing. And within that, you've had a period of, I think they had 3 consecutive draws. And now, over the last week, it's gone sort of from bad to worse with the draw at Arbroath, which in itself was no disaster, but that was then followed by the debacle at Brora last week, which has been billed as Hearts' worst ever result. I think that does a slight injustice to Brora in the sense that they're probably an SFL club in all but name. They probably would be a League One club, or probably capable of holding their own at League One, but ultimately Hearts have lost to a Highland League club. That is an absolute shocker. No getting away from that. And then, as if to compound matters, when you expect some sort of positive reaction, some sort of indication that there's a bit of fight in there, and that was a bad day at the office. Not that it could be just washed away as a bad day at the office, but you wanted to see some sort of indication that we're out to make amends here. And then a couple of minutes in, and they just implode defensively. Queen of the South take the lead. go 2-0 ahead after 20 odd minutes. And then Hearts claw it back to 2-2, and then there's another defensive disaster, and they lose 3-2 at home to Queen of the South, while supporters are already outside protesting, wanting the removal of the manager. I mean, it's a toxic situation. It's the manager's back is firmly against the wall. Whether he'll survive it, I don't think it's cut and dried that he will go. I'm less than... When Queen of the South were winning 2-0 on Saturday, I thought surely he's a goner after this. But the fact he's still here now, it's Monday night, I'm not sure he's going to get... I think I get the feeling he's going to get a little bit more time to try and ride this out.
Yeah, now Stephen, I'm going to come to you now, mate. I mean, a Scottish Cup exit to Highland League champions Brora Rangers ranks amongst the most humiliating in the club's history. Anthony kind of touched on it a bit as well. It was a result that Captain Christoph Berra believes was coming. I mean, you said last week it's going to finish, it's going to be 1-0 Brora. Was that tongue-in-cheek, mate, or did you honestly see that a defeat on the cards for Hearts?
I mean, to be honest, it was tongue-in-cheek at the time, but it wasn't, to me, a massive surprise that Hearts got beaten that match, genuinely. And that is the most stinging indictment that you could possibly have at the club at this moment in time. I just think, I've been saying on this show for weeks now, anytime we've touched on Hearts, even when they were getting results, I just think there is obvious issues, obvious problems with the squad, with the way that the team's set up. And to me, the coaching is one of the biggest issues at the club at the moment. I've said for months that they do not look like a well-coached side. They do not look like a side who have the ability or the nous within their ranks to be able to kind of break down these teams who sit with 10 men and try and counter-attack. They don't have the in-game intelligence to be able to sort of say, right, that's fine, we can deal with this, we look at it. This is what they've come up against in most games. And out of Ayr United, the Hearts have dropped points against every other team in that division. That's scandalous. Like, given the budget, the players, the so-called management team that we've had, we've had everything in place on paper to be able to... Again, I'm not expecting them to go and steamroller every team in the league. That's not what it's about. It's about having a set plan and something that's sort of outlined for going forward, and a style of play, a way of playing. And it's so predictable. It's so boring. A perfect example of that: Gary Mackay-Stevens has been substituted for Jamie Walker between the 60th and the 65th minute every game for the last 6 games. So it's the same subs getting used at the same time. It's like they've just run out of ideas. They get to a certain point in the game and go, right, well, we'll just try this again and see if it'll work this week. I mean, and don't get me wrong, Jamie Walker has come off the bench and scored goals at times. And then people are saying, well, if that's the case, why is he starting the next match? Gary Mackay-Stevens has been nothing short of abysmal in the games that he's played. And again, I just think it's not working. The management side of things, the coaching side of things, these guys came with, a reasonable reputation. Robbie Nielsen, I for one was quite happy when he got the job back. I always thought that he was very harshly dealt with the first time round at Hearts, and it was one of those ones where after he was gone, maybe 18 months later, you're looking at going, what on earth were Hearts fans thinking? They were sitting second in the league and they were complaining about style of play. Well, we've now got these same issues about style of play, but we're sitting in the Championship. And we're nowhere near convincing enough. But I mean, to me, and I know we'll probably come on to this a bit later, this is just the tip of the iceberg for me. I have got major issues with a lot of stuff that's going on at the club.
Yeah, I'm going to some of the comments. Hi to Lee, thanks for this comment. It's not just recently, we've had 2 or 3 good performances all season. With the money spent and facilities at his disposal, it's simply not good enough. He needs to go. Not a Robbie Nielsen fan. There is a couple of Nielsen supporters. Nielsen's remit was to get promotion. Job done. I mean, I can see that argument as well. We'll discuss that very shortly. I'd just like to quickly go back to the Brora game, Anthony, just very quickly. I mean, what we kind of need to remember, a club similar to Brora, Bonnyrigg, they ran Dundee. I mean, probably not as big a club as Hearts, but it's in the same division, same sort of league standing in the table. They ran Dundee quite close. Is it a case now that the gap between smaller clubs like non-league Bonnyrigg and that division, it's a bold statement, I know, but I mean, I can guarantee the likes of Bonnyrigg, East Kilbride, Kelty Hearts, they could maybe hold their own, and certainly the SPFL. I mean, like you said, Brora Rangers, they're maybe a League 2 side. I mean, these guys, they train just as much as the likes of Arbroath twice a week, who are in that same league as Hearts. I mean, yes, Hearts should not be getting beat by Brora Rangers, but is the gap between the non-league sides and the club level now at that level maybe not as big a gap as it used to be?
Yeah, I think certainly with the stronger non-league sides, we've seen enough examples of non-league sides making it difficult for league teams. I think the example you highlight there is very fair. The Bonnyrigg and Dundee one, I think the difference is Dundee didn't actually lose that in the end, did they?
Good point.
So they managed to find a way through it. I mean, that's the margins of football. They could have easily lost that night, but they didn't. And the other one that could have, Hearts against Auchinleck Talbot in
2012. Yeah.
They actually went on and won the cup that year, but for 84 minutes, that game was 0-0 at Tynecastle. I would argue, had they not scored at that point when they did, and that game ends 0-0, it's probably just as bad as what happened last week. But the difference is Hearts found a way. They got the goal that day, and the rest is history. They went on to win the tournament. I think the problem we've got here for Hearts is I hate using the word narrative, but there is a narrative building now. It's like, had Robbie Neilson got through that game last week, even if he'd scraped through on extra time or after a replay, his head would have been just above water in terms of, it's not been a great season, it's been pretty unconvincing, but ultimately we got the job done. We got to a Scottish Cup final just before Christmas, we did well there. And the hope would be that if you're going to get knocked out of this Scottish Cup, you at least go out against a team that is perceived to be of a similar level to you. Because let's be honest, every team is going to go out the Scottish Cup bar the winners. The chances are they would have lost to somebody at some point, but the fact is they've lost to a team who are a non-league team, and that is the ramifications of that, rightly or wrongly, go way beyond what the next 5 or 6 games bring. Robbie Neilson could win the rest of the games this season pretty handsomely, and people might calm down a little bit if that happens, but then he's only ever one defeat away in the Premiership. Say they go up next year to the Premiership and they're away at Hibs in Game 3. They win their first 2 games in the Premiership against St Johnstone and Motherwell. They go to Easter Road and they lose 1-0. Instead of that just being a derby defeat earlier in the season, suddenly it's that clown Neilson who presided over the debacle in Brora last season and also has this previous game against Hibs still hanging over him from his previous reign, which I think is wrong, but that's the way it tends to be. Everything gets brought up whenever something goes wrong, and I just can't see how he's going to shake off this Brora result. Personally, I think he has it in him to go up to the Premiership, restructure this team over the summer, because Robbie Neilson is a ruthless guy. He will know that this team is not performing. He obviously can't get a tune out of them, and he will have ideas about who he wants to get rid of. We've seen today that Christoph Berra won't have his contract renewed. Other players will be told they're surplus to requirements, regardless of whether Robbie Neilson's here or not. But Robbie, the last time Hearts went up with a very good championship winning team, he got rid of Adam Eckersley. Ali Mosturk was gone pretty soon afterwards. He wasn't shy in getting rid of decent players, so I don't think he's going to be shy in saying to anybody in this squad, your time is up, we need to replace you. The question then is, can he replace them with superior players and get the best out of them? I wouldn't bet against that happening. I still think there is a possibility that if you take the emotion out of it, he could get Hearts into the top 4 next season. I know there will be lots of people shouting at the screen saying, how can you say that? But he's got a track record of generally, when it comes to the league, doing what his remit is. For example, he won the championship the first time at Hearts. In his second season, he had them in 3rd. In the season where he left them in 2nd. Maybe that was a slightly skewed, you could say, left them in the top 4. Dundee United, he won the league in his first full season, and at Hearts, he's going to win the league in his first full season back. So in terms of league objectives, he generally meets them. And that's why I would think if he kept him, he probably would achieve that objective. However, I would couch that by saying that any setback is now an utter disaster. Even if it's just a routine league defeat, it's always going to be accompanied by so much animosity, so much anger, more negativity than a normal defeat at another club might sort of... I suppose it's like the Neil Lennon Celtic situation. He could go on a wee run in 2 or 3 games, but he's only ever one more defeat away from anarchy among the supporters online or in the stands if and when they're allowed back in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the players that you touched on there is Christoph Berra. His contract's not been renewed. Stephen, how big a servant has he been to the club?
He's been a fantastic servant to the club over 2 spells, and I feel really bad for Berra, because up until he got that horrific injury where he was kind of ruled out for 6 to 8 months, I think he ripped his hamstring off the bone. He was probably our best player, and he was probably one of the best defenders in the country at that point. And to me, I think, I mean, I have no facts to base this on. I think he was rushed back when he eventually came back, and he's just never, ever been the same since. He's never recovered. He's never got anywhere near the level of where he was previously and what we knew he was capable of. And that might be a combination of the injury issues and his age. But I just think it's actually been painful to watch at times over the last couple of years. This year especially, when he's come into the team, he's just looked an absolute shadow of the player. So it's no surprise to me that they've decided to get rid of him. I don't have any ill feeling towards Christoph Berra. I think he's done what he needed to do at Hearts, and he's kind of represented the club really well in both spells that he's been there. So I think most Hearts fans will have a lot of time for him, but I don't think many will disagree with the decision to not renew his contract, because he's just part of the overall problem. Going back to what you were saying earlier, Anthony obviously compared the situation to Celtic's situation. We've sat on the show and absolutely ripped Celtic to bits for weeks on end, and arguably I would say the situation at Hearts is as bad, if not worse, than the situation Celtic find themselves in. Celtic have a massive rebuilding job across the club, and we've touched on that many times, but they don't have that big a gap to bridge to be able to get back to where they think where they belong, like challenging Rangers for that top of that league. They don't have that far a distance to do that. Hearts have got miles to even get close to being a third place team, which is ultimately where we think we belong. I think you've got to look at the situation as a whole. Like, you've got all these people who are crying out for Robbie Neilson to be removed from his position, and I am also one of these people. I'm not saying for a second he should remain as manager. I don't think so at all. I would get rid of him tomorrow. I would get rid of him now if it was up to me. But it's I just think it's a much bigger issue than that. It's not quite as simple as if you remove the manager. I had this discussion with one of my friends on Saturday that if we remove him tonight and we give Derek McInnes or Alex Neil or whoever else the job, that'll be it. That will be fixed. Could not be further away from the truth. The problems at Hearts are far deeper than who's in charge of the first team. If you look at this situation overall, the amount of money that's been wasted in the last 5 years, Anne Budge has come into Hearts, and every Hearts fan will be thankful to her for what she's done in terms of keeping the club alive, pushing them on in terms of financially, revenue streams off the park, all different things. She's built us the new stand. Well, I say she's built us. We've built the stand with her overseeing it and sort of fronting the money for it. The stand's been built. They've put the new Sky Lounge in. They've got all these different revenue streams. They've got a new memorial garden at Tynecastle. There's the fan plaza out front. All these things on the surface are fantastic for the football club. But the one thing that Anne Budge forgets is that it is a football club. It is not a business. It is all these revenue streams and business parts of the club are a means to an end, and that means to an end is what happens on the park on a Saturday afternoon between 3 and 4:45. That is all the fans care about. We do not care what the balance sheet looks like. We do not care. As long as the club is safe and in decent hands, what matters to us is what happens on the park. And time after time, this has been nowhere near good enough for this club. There has been failures after failure after failure, and all these things have been short-term plans, short-term fixes. How do we get through this? They've signed over 100 players since Anne Budge has come through the door. She has been advised by Craig Levein. She's now being advised by God knows who. I don't know what if Joe Savage has overall say in what goes on. Nobody knows. But whatever happens on her watch, to me, the things that have happened on the park are nowhere near good enough. And again, you can have the argument that all these things that she's done are fantastic, but look at the cold hard facts. We are in the exact same position as the day she walked in the door. We are in the Championship of Scotland. And the most damning thing for me is all the money that's been spent and all the players that have been brought in. What sellable assets do Hearts have at this moment in time? What members of that first team squad, if we really wanted to, could we sell for anywhere near decent money? There is not one person in that squad who I would say is worth more than £1 million. That is nowhere near good enough.
I don't think there's anybody close to him. I would have said Boyce a wee while back, but he seems to have gone off the boil even recently. there's nobody there that you would. I mean, Irvine gets a lot of hype, but for me, I don't really get it.
No.
He's a good player. He's a cultured footballer. He's very good in terms of an academy boy coming through and holding his own in the first team. But for me, he's not. I'm astounded that he's even considering not accepting a contract from Hearts. I don't think he's a standout in any way. Walker's had his moments off the bench, but he's not a sellable asset.
If Hearts strengthen next year, Andy Irvine wouldn't be anywhere near. He'd be a squad player at best. This is what I'm saying. There are so many things that have gone wrong that even if you look at that. The academy, look at the academy, right? So, yeah, the academy was left in an absolute disaster. It was a disaster area when Romanov left. There had been no money put into it. So there was a massive rebuilding job for Craig Levine to do, right? But I think it was 2018-2019 season, over the top 8 leagues in Europe, Hearts had given more teenagers minutes in the Premier League or in league games than any other club in the top 8 leagues in Europe. This season, there is not 1 minute of football has been played in the league by a teenager for Hearts. What does that tell you about this famed academy? What does that tell you about these young players that were coming through? All these star players that you thought were going to come on to big things. Harry Cochrane, Anthony McDonald. Where have they gone? What have they come to? Connor Smith. You've got the Cammy Logan, the right back. These guys have all been loaned out. I understand the COVID situations maybe played into that a little bit. But these are guys who have been deemed not good enough to play for the club. He brought in Elliot Frear and Jordan Roberts as wingers in the summer. Are you telling me that these guys are any better than Callum Morrison, who he let go to Falkirk, or Lewis Moore, or Ewan Henderson? Like, I get it. These 3 young guys at Hearts have never really shown that much to say that they should be getting a run in the first team. But neither of the guys that have been brought in. So to me, it's baffling the way that this club is run. It's short-term fix after short-term fix. There is no long-term planning at Hearts.
Yeah, I mean, very passionate, Stephen. There's a lot of people. Leslie Thompson, you tell them, Stephen. Ian's been on the chat as well, and he's saying Heartsman speaks from the heart. I absolutely get that. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of fans that can agree with you, Stephen. I mean, manager Robbie Neilson is under a lot of pressure, Anthony. Owner Ann Budge has come out and pleads for Cam from the supporters, which was ignored as a planned protest outside the stadium on Saturday. Went ahead. Now, first point, Anthony, I just want to say that we've all kind of gone in hard at other clubs for gathering in large groups during this pandemic. I mean, we all have to be in agreement that maybe that's not the acceptable way to do so, is it? But if that's not, then how do the fans get their voice heard?
I think that's a dilemma a lot of Hearts supporters have had over the past week, because there is a feeling that they want to protest in some form, whether that's in terms of actually turning up at the stadium, which is completely under no circumstances should be condoned. That should not be encouraged in any way. And I was actually thinking there could be a sizable amount that turn up here on Saturday, but thankfully it was a minority in the grand scheme. And a lot of people who were very angry on social media were actually making a big point of, do not go to the plaza. It's just, you're going to bring sort of shame on the club if you do that in the middle of a pandemic. So fair play to all those guys. I think you've now got a situation where a lot of Hearts supporters are having this dilemma of, do I withdraw my financial support from the club? That's the only way people are going to pay attention. I understand it. It's not something I would do personally. Not that I am a paying supporter, so I can't preach to people who are. But I don't know if I agree with the whole sort of, I'm withdrawing my financial support because I don't agree with who the manager is. I just the whole fundamental of that, and I don't like that. But I do understand why people feel that way. So there's people withdrawing or pausing their Foundation of Hearts pledges, and also vowing not to renew a season ticket if Robbie Neilson's still the manager. And so, yeah, this is a situation where Ann Budge is sort of between a rock and a hard place, because people will say it's an obvious decision to get rid of Robbie Neilson. From Ann Budge's perspective, it will not be that obvious, because she clearly values Robbie Neilson. She clearly rates him. She works with him regularly. She felt compelled to go out and get him and bring him back to Hearts. So she's her appointment. He is her appointment, and she's going to want to give him every chance, I would think, to prove himself. And people will say that's to her detriment. She should learn from her mistakes of persisting with Craig Levine. And by her own admission, she held on to Craig Levine too long. She should have I mean, people argue he should have gone after the 2019 Scottish Cup final. I think there's little doubt that he should have certainly gone after the fans' protests following the Motherwell game in September 2019. But he managed to stay in his job until the end of the October, which was pretty much 6 weeks later. So she is perceived to be very loyal to people she values, and that will be the dilemma she has at the moment, because she will absolutely want Robbie Neilson to be a successful Hearts manager and vindicate her decision to bring him back. But at the same time, she will be well aware of, by now, I mean, she's been at Hearts for 6-7 years now in terms of running the club. She knows how deep sort of fans feeling run at this club, and when things are good, they're great, but when things are bad, it can really get toxic, as she's finding out at the moment. And so I think she'll be torn between loyalty to Robbie Neilson, and she will believe he can turn this round on a logical football basis, and I can see why she would think that. But equally, she will also have to think, hang on a minute, if we start getting hit financially and we go up to the Premiership and we've not got the same income from the supporters, that is an issue. I mean, it's so I think, in short, in answer to your question, the protests will come from some people in the form of payments being stopped.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a unique situation, Stephen, because it's not often you'll see fans wanting to change it at the higher level from, like you say, manager, whether that be Anne Budge as well, when they're sitting 13 points clear at the top of the table.
Again, though, Sammy, that is literally just papering over cracks. Like, the fact is, let's face it, we should never be in this division in the first place. This division is a one-horse race, and we are making heavy work of a one-horse race. Like every other team around Hearts, and this is not me being arrogant, you look at other team, every other team has cut each other's throats. Wraith have taken points off Dunfermline. Dunfermline have taken points off of Dundee. Dundee have taken points off of Wraith. They have cut each other's throats at every turn. So Hearts, yes, they're 13 points clear, but probably through no... Hearts have probably just been a little bit more consistent than the other teams. Like, they've consistently got results even when performances have been pretty poor, and they have been, as Lee said right at the start with his comment. You could probably count on one hand the amount of even decent performances, never mind good performances, that Hearts have had. So yeah, they're 13 points clear in the Championship. Fair enough, and you cannot take away from that point. And if Hearts were not 13 points clear, he would have been removed a long time before now. I think people for once, I think Hearts fans are actually opening their eyes to what is going on, the full scenario at the club. They are not just looking at what is going on in the table in terms of points, and they are looking at performances. Because we're not in the stadiums, we're everything's more magnified. You're looking at these things in a lot more detail, whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. But to me, it is as clear as the nose on my face that he is not the man to take Hearts forward. I'm sorry. Like Tony was saying that Anne Budge will have wanted this to work. I wanted it to work. I wanted Robbie Neilson to be a success, because I thought he'd been harshly treated the first time round, and he's a Hearts man. He played most of his career at Tynecastle. I don't have any ill feeling against Robbie Neilson as a person. I wanted him to be a success at Hearts, but he hasn't been. And the facts are, he's had opportunities in this league to try different things, and they haven't done so. They've continued to go to that well, the same thing over and over again, and it hasn't worked.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously Robbie thought it would work as well. I mean, he kind of put his eggs all in one basket. Anthony jumped ship from newly promoted Dundee United to stay in the Championship. He obviously has long-term plans for the club, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Robbie's of a mind to go anywhere. Or I would suspect if he was going to walk, he'd have walked after the game on Saturday. So I don't think he'll be of any mind at the moment to walk out here. And even the fact that they're already looking towards the future in terms of announcing that Christophe Berra won't get a new contract, and now they're looking at bringing Shea Logan in for the remainder of the season and possibly beyond that. That suggests to me that Robbie is still planning ahead, looking ahead, thinking about what's ahead of him, as opposed to thinking, how do I survive the next few days? And certainly from his quotes, he doesn't give the impression of a man he clearly knows there's a pressure building around him, but I don't think he's given the vibe of a man who feels like it's the end for him. I mean, ultimately it will come down to Anne Budge to decide whether his time's up, but at the moment I don't think he's of a mind to go. And as you say, he's given up a lot at Dundee United, in the sense that that was a club back in the Premiership at that point, or just about to go back into the Premiership. Maybe things weren't quite right there, but there was certainly a chance to go up and sort of make an impact in the Premiership. They've finished they're going to finish roughly mid-table, high end of the bottom six this season, Dundee United. So there possibly would have been scope to push on even that wee bit further and maybe even get the top six in the first season back. Robbie will have thought, actually, I've got a better chance if I take a 1 year hit, go down to the Championship with Hearts and come back with even more clout, and then I can really go for Europe when I get back into the Premiership. Plus, he has that loyalty to Hearts in the sense that he was a player for a long time. I say loyalty, I mean affiliation. So that was obviously a big thing in terms of him coming back here. So he will not want to give that up easily. So if it comes down to, I mean, you leave Hearts in a situation like this, the only way is down at the moment. Yeah. It's not like he's leaving here when his stock's high and he can go down to England like he did the last time and he gets waved off and everything's sort of hunky-dory. This time he would leave under a cloud and he would be viewed, rightly or wrongly, as damaged goods, and the next job he gets is going to be beneath Hearts and probably beneath Dundee United. So he will want to cling on to this job for as long as possible. So I don't envisage him walking. So I think ultimately it's going to come down to Anne Budge and the Hearts board to decide whether he is able to see out the season. And my gut feeling is that he will see out the season, barring any further calamities in the coming weeks.
Yeah, the one thing I'd say about that is though, see anybody who watched that Hearts documentary that was made, which was cringy, is like the one thing for me that annoyed me the most out of that entire documentary wasn't even the fact that Hearts got relegated and all the narrative that was around that. The thing that annoyed me the most was the recruitment of Daniel Stendhal. Like, that whole process just looked like the Chuckle brothers had been put in charge of it. There was people who were involved in these meetings. There was a guy from the Foundation of Hearts that must have been about 95 years old. There was, I forget her name, but the finance director, the female finance director at Hearts, and Anne Budge. And they couldn't even pronounce some of the people's names that were on the shortlist. And that's not me having a go at them but they clearly didn't know these people or what they could offer as candidates, or why were they in charge of anything to do with recruitment? This is what I'm saying. Anne Budge and anybody who is kind of associated with that former, they shouldn't be anywhere near making football decisions at Hearts. Whether Robbie Neilson was rehired, whether he's then ultimately fired, whoever maybe comes in and replaces him, whatever happens with the structure of the academy, all these things, Anne Budge shouldn't get a say in any of them. She should sign the cheques and defer to somebody who knows better than her. There is Jim Jeffries has got a role as an advisor to the board. You've got the new CEO, Andrew McKinley. He's in there to do a job. What is he doing at this moment in time? I don't know. You've got the director of football, Joe Savage. Why have we got all these people with football backgrounds and sporting backgrounds involved with the club if we are not going to allow them to make the decisions, ultimately what happens on a football pitch? Anne Budge should not get a say in what happens apart from the financial aspects of it. Her feelings towards Robbie Neilson or anybody else at that club should not matter, because ultimately she's handing over the reins to the Foundation of Hearts in the summer anyway. So why should she get a say? It's exactly the same scenario as Peter Lawwell at Celtic. Why should he get a say in who the new manager is going to be if there's a new CEO who's going to come in and run things day to day? I don't think Anne Budge should be anywhere near the decision making at Hearts.
Stephen, just as you said that, David Kelly, sounds like Budge is the same as Lawwell.
Yep.
Literally the very second you said that popped up. Do keep the comments coming. I'm trying to get through them. There is quite a few paragraphs in some of them tonight, so I am trying to read through them. There's this one here from Frank. As an outsider looking in, get rid of Neilson, bring in Derek McInnes, who is vastly experienced and now with big point to prove. Give him a 5-year contract. He can start to address all the issues, do a full rebuild by the sounds of it there. I mean, Anthony, is that what's maybe putting added pressure on Robbie Neilson? Are the fans starting to now see, well, there's actually quite a high calibre of managers out of work at the moment that could maybe come in and make a change at Hearts? I'm thinking obviously Derek McInnes, Alex Neil, sorry. I mean, do you think that's adding fuel to the fire?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I tweeted after the Brora game. If you're going to have your worst ever, preside over your club's worst ever result, it gets exacerbated when there are two, or what I would deem to be ideal candidates currently out of work, sitting there waiting for the next opportunity. And Derek McInnes and Alex Neil, for me, if you're forming a Hearts shortlist, the last time they had a managerial vacancy, there was no standout candidate. When Daniel Stendel got it, there was no standout obvious candidate. You had Stephen Robinson, Jack Ross. I mean, there was all sorts linked with that job from memory. And it emerged, in my view, Stendel became the standout manager, but only because there was no obvious standout manager, if that makes sense. I think there was none of the sort of domestic contenders really appealed that much. So then when Stendel became available, you thought, hang on a minute, this guy comes with good pedigree from England. He's done great things at Barnsley, albeit things tailed off for him a little bit in his closing months there. And he looks like a guy who's going to play the sort of exciting football that Hearts fans want. The obvious problem with Stendel is he had no Scottish football background, which to me is a big thing. I think generally speaking, 90% of managerial appointments are probably... I've probably worded that wrong. What I mean to say is many appointments from out west Scottish football tend to fail, or certainly that's the feeling I've got. So with Stendel coming in, you had a bit of an unknown quantity getting the job because there was no obvious candidate sitting there. Here, Derek McInnes and Alex Neil for me are either or. I mean, I would probably say McInnes on the basis that he's actually achieved what Hearts want to achieve in the sense of consistently finishing in the European places. Alex Neil, for all that he's operated at a higher level in recent years, hasn't actually probably gone to that level in the Scottish Premiership because his best work in Scotland was with Hamilton Accies in the bottom end of the league. So can he take over Hearts where they are now and catapult them straight into Europe? I would suggest he probably could, but Derek McInnes is a guy who's actually been through this process with Aberdeen, where he inherited a team that was in the bottom six and going nowhere fast. Similar situation, I suppose, to what Hearts are in now, just going through that doldrum period where things are really grim. And McInnes just hauled them up by their bootlaces. First season, he got them into what did they finish, third or fourth, or maybe even second in his first season? Certainly top three, and they won a cup in his first season. And from then on, they were always in the top four. Even when things started to tail off a bit, he was still always in the top four. I've always felt he seems like a natural guy to manage Hearts, and he's always spoken well about Hearts, I think. And I've always felt on the basis that he was to leave the Aberdeen job, that he would view the Hearts job as a decent one in terms of you do generally get that period to build, which you maybe don't get in the English Championship, or which he might not have got had he taken the Rangers job a few years ago. So I think McInnes would be interested in the stability he would get at Hearts. The size of the club is something he's used to from his time at Aberdeen. And I think he fits the bill perfectly if Robbie Neilson was to go. Now, I'm not endorsing Neilson's sacking in any way in terms of it's not something I necessarily want to happen. I really like Robbie Neilson as a person, first and foremost. And I do think he's a very good manager who, under different circumstances, will, or even if he stayed on, as I said, I still think he could be a good Hearts manager. But you have to factor in the fact the supporters have turned almost en masse at the moment, and I don't think that's turning. So I think, for want of a better phrase, I think he's toast at Hearts, whether that's in the short term or even in the next season. I just don't see this having a successful outcome for Robbie Neilson at Hearts. And if and when he does go, I don't think you'll get a better candidate than Derek McInnes. And the danger for Hearts is that if they allow this to run on too long, McInnes and Alex Neil get snapped up, and then they're left with inferior options when they do eventually come to make the managerial change that everybody is now feeling is inevitable at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to put this to both of you. I mean, what is Daniel Stendel's situation at the moment? Does he have a club?
No, he narrowly missed out on the Portsmouth job, I think. I think he was in for the Portsmouth job when it was the Cowley brothers got it eventually.
So how's this for a theory then? So you stay with Robbie to the end of the season. Everyone used to say, Daniel Stendel, right man, wrong time. So
I was going to tweet the exact same thing the other day there, because that is the narrative. It's gone with Stendel. He was the right man at the wrong time. And I do agree with that, because Stendel, he wasn't cut out for fighting a relegation battle. That was not his forte, which we've learned in hindsight. Obviously, we didn't really know that at the time, but he didn't have the tools to deal with that situation. Mm. But I think we saw enough from him within that to see that he can completely change the way the team wants to play, the way the team wants to approach things. Now, people say, why didn't he get the chance in the Championship? If that was the case, why wasn't he given the chance to sort of continue or almost get a full pre-season and then go up in the Championship? I still think sticking with Stendel would have been a very risky thing in terms of the need to get out the Championship at the first attempt. And with Robbie Neilson, whether you rate him or not, he's pretty much a cast iron guarantee of winning the Championship. That's what he's done at Hearts previously. That's what he had done at Dundee United that particular season. And coming back to Hearts at that point, it made sense in the sense that he's pretty much going to guarantee you get up. I wouldn't, although subsequently we've found out that no team has been able to string together any consistency. You or I could probably have managed Hearts to the Championship title, but we didn't know that last summer. For all we knew, Dunfermline could have been really good. Dunfermline could have been winning every week, and Hearts might have needed a real sort of consistent manager to get them up.
I thought it would be Dundee. I thought Dundee would be as good as Hearts this year. I was really surprised when they were kind of dropped off as much as they can. But I totally agree with you. I think if we'd had the same discussion in the summer last year, I would have been saying, "Oh no, Stendhal, absolutely no way. Robbie Neilson is a far safer option." But again, hindsight is a wonderful thing. You look at it now and think, Daniel Stendhal may have taken a bit more time to bed in, but would Hearts under Daniel Stendhal have a way of playing, a style, something that you could take up to the Premier League next year and build on and try and... I think yes. I think Hearts would have a much more defined style under Daniel Stendhal and maybe be playing attractive football. Is again, I hate that phrase because I'm all about results. I'm not really massive on style, but you need to have substance in what you're doing. You need to have a plan, and I just don't see a plan at Hearts. They lurch from one thing to the next and try this and try. Doesn't work. Daniel Stendhal would have had Hearts playing some decent football. Whether they would have had as many points on the board as Robbie Neilson, I don't know. But I think we would have been in a better place as a club.
Yeah, I mean, we go back to, I think what Simi was implying there is, does Daniel Stendhal come back in the summer if he's still available?
That's exactly where I was going. Yeah.
You know what? Going back to that right man, wrong time, perhaps going into a new season in the Premiership is the right time for Daniel Stendhal. Do you know what I mean? Like he's going to, I'm just hypothetically speaking here. Say you bring him in mid-May and give him a full summer. He sort of knows what's going on at Hearts. He knows the lie of the land in terms of having been there before. And then if he gets a full pre-season to implement his playing style, bring in a couple of guys. I mean, to be honest, I'm talking about it now and I'm remembering some of the guys he brought in the last January. They were pretty uninspiring. The boy Donis Avijay, I can't even remember how to pronounce his name, and Marcel Langer. I mean, to be honest, his recruitment was pretty shoddy. But having said that, I think
he also brought in Boyce, and Civic plays week in, week out now.
I like to look at him. He got injured, didn't he?
Yeah.
He brought in I think he was up against it as well, Tony. You got to remember the timings when he got in. Again, the documentary. If the Hearts hadn't made this documentary, people wouldn't know what was going on. But in the documentary, it was very clear he gave them a list of players that he wanted, and they were unable to get player 1, player 2, player 3. So it was going further and further down that list of guys that he was wanting to get, and it was getting later and later in the window before they were bringing people in. There was the other guy, Mamadou Thiam, I think he was the winger, that he was desperate to get him. And obviously they were trying to balance it up by getting players out the door. Berra, I think, eventually went out last day of the window. Glenn Whelan, they were trying to negotiate his kind of release for his contract. So I wouldn't judge his recruitment purely on what he did in that January window. Again, Daniel Stendhal for me would be a reasonable option to go for, but it would be way down the pecking order in terms of if you're looking at McInnes and Alec Neil.
Yeah, part of the problem with Stendhal as well is much the same as Robbie Neilson, although there is a big section of Hearts supporters who really took to Daniel Stendhal and still hold a candle for him. I think there's also an element that say, well, actually, if you look at his record, he took us down from a position where we should still have been able to turn it around and at least get off the bottom of the league. And I kind of agree with that. I think you or I could have got Hearts off the bottom of the league at that time. I know people will say it was deep-rooted malaise and he was up against it, but I still think there should have been enough to spark some sort of upturn, enough to be able to get away from the relegation zone, if nothing else. And that is definitely going to be something that you would count as a stain on Daniel Stendhal's record. So even if he was to hypothetically come back, which I don't envisage happening, there would still be a big element of the support waiting for him to have his first blip and say, I told you so, that's why we shouldn't have brought him back. So no, I don't think it's really a realistic option. I think McInnes or Neil are certainly the two standout available candidates at the moment. If those two were to get hoovered up, I don't think you'll get such eye-catching candidates next time around.
Yeah, I'm just going to go to some of the comments. I mean, Scott Forbes has said Alex Neil would be a good fit. Kind of agree with you there, Scott. I think he'd be a great manager at Hearts. Ian Henderson says Hearts need to go for a manager with a reputation. Alex Neil won't take the role. His family is settled down south. So there we go. Having a look at some other comments. Lee's been back in touch. Says Stendhal wanted to reshape the entire football and philosophy at the club. It was a long-term project and should have been given time. I mean, again, it goes back to the right guy, wrong time. I mean, my thought there, I was going to go with the comment was, yes, Robbie, thanks for your time. You've got us promoted. Now, Daniel, you have unfinished business at Hearts and you've got a full season. Make it work. That's maybe what I was going to put to you guys to see if you would have taken me on with that. Hi to Hunter as well. We can't afford to get the next appointment, wherever that may be, wrong. That's the bottom line. And I think that kind of hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? The next manager that comes in at Hearts has to be in it long term. He has to be in it to get that club back to where it should be, doesn't he?
Yeah. There is short-term thinking that was involved in getting back up this year. Like there's no getting away from that. They were just basically saying, right, who's the safest pair of hands that will get us out of this league back to where we belong. But that's all well and good. But you need to have a long-term. What do we do? Do we just at the end of every season do we just rip up a contract for a manager and go, right, you've taken us that next step. Now to go another step further, we need to bring in a guy who's going to do that. That's no way to run a club. And plus, the turnover of players is already at an absolutely unacceptable level. So if you're just having these wee short-term plans to get yourself out of that, like signing guys like Shea Logan, great. Like he's 33 years old. Like signing Andy Halliday, again, okay, fair enough. It'll do you a job in the Championship. But when you go to the Premier League, like, where are the John Souters? Where are the Kevin Nisbet signings? Where's the Lawrence Shanklins? Where's the thinking outside the box? Maybe spending a couple of $100,000 and going and getting somebody like
Craig White.
Exactly. Look at how that worked out. So it's where they have spent money, they've spent it in the wrong places, and some of the times these things don't work out. But I'm telling you now, 2 years ago they could have got Jason Kerr for St Johnstone for a couple of $100,000. They probably could have got him for 300,000-400,000. You're now talking $1 million plus for a guy like that, and he's exactly the type of player that Hearts are crying out for. A guy who's probably a very, very good age, who, if he played at Hearts for 2 or 3 years and got to a good level, he would then move on and go to the Championship in England. Or like, these are the kind of players that we're looking at. But now they've missed the boat on so many of these guys. So many.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hi to Ben on the messages tonight. I've just subscribed. I think that's what it means anyway. Thanks very much. It takes a couple of minutes to do so, guys. If you've not already done so, subscribe to the State of Mind YouTube channel. I mean, there's a statement that's come out. Hearts players are 100% behind under pressure manager Robbie Neilson, says defender Craig Halkett. Do you think that's just a gesture, Anthony, or do you think that is 100% the case? Are the players still buying into what Robbie says?
It's easy to suggest or not when times like this start to, when you get moments like this, it's natural that that's the sort of thing that starts to get said, of down tools or not playing for the manager and what have you. I mean, I think that's a bit lazy and cliched at times. Obviously it can be true sometimes. I've not heard anything to suggest that they're unhappy with Robbie at the moment, so I wouldn't like to speculate and say they've chucked it or anything. But certainly they look like a team, a beleaguered team. They look like they're lacking spark, they're lacking something. That doesn't necessarily mean they've lost faith in Robbie Neilson. I mean, they could just play with no fans, getting criticised left, right and centre, rightly so, in terms of the results and the performances. And obviously the confidence loss that will come from that. It all ties into sort of creating this negative, toxic atmosphere that isn't conducive to footballers playing at their best. I mean, it's a very hard environment for the players, but equally the players have created this situation by playing so passively. I mean, I don't know. I'm always wary of saying players are not trying, they're not giving 100%, because usually that's nonsense. Usually, I can't remember who it was. It was one footballer that said 99% of the time players are trying full pelt. It's just sometimes things are not coming off for them, or it looks like they're not trying because they're not running about like 100 miles an hour. But there comes a point where you think Hearts have got so much perceived quality in that squad. How we said earlier in the season that there will be the odd moment where they fall a bit short and teams will shock them, they'll catch them cold. But it's now become a regular thing. Like they've won less games than they've dropped points in more games than they've won since the turn of the year. And that's a concern when you factor in the level of opposition, because in theory, surely, I don't know what it's like to play at that level, but surely if you've got Gary Mackay, Stephen, Andrew Halliday, Stephen Naismith, Christophe Berra, Craig Halkett, I know none of these guys have performed at the level they're used to, but surely amongst themselves they can rouse something, just even if it's a bit of shouting at each other, a bit of niggle or whatever, because I know from even just playing 7-a-side, you get riled with your teammates and you get a wee spark and it gets something going. You just go in, give somebody a wee dunt or whatever, and it just sparks your team a wee bit. And I just wonder how that can't happen at professional level and just suddenly make Hearts sort of, maybe this is very simplistic, but you would think they would be able to find a way to overpower inferior opponents.
So obviously Craig Levein covered the Hearts game on BBC Sports Sound on Saturday, right? Which I thought was a bit of a controversial move for them in the first place. And to be fair, he got basically ripped to his face by Alan Preston. I think they had Stevie Kilgour on from the foundation, and Craig Levein being there, he never shied away from it. So fair play to him. But the one thing that stood out for me was that he couldn't believe at 2-0 down that there is not a fan in the ground, and he commented that I can't hear Christophe Berra, Craig Halkett, guys that he probably knows, guys who he knew well enough to make them the captain at Hearts and the vice captain at Hearts during his time, and he couldn't believe that he wasn't hearing them screaming at players, like, just demanding more. It was almost like like as you say, a malaise that had sort of set into that entire squad, that they've just kind of given up, that they're no longer willing to fight anymore.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we are a full Scottish football show. We're on every Monday night at 6:30. We've got some regular viewers. If we've got any new ones, I'm just putting that out there. But obviously because it's International Week, we have been able to address the situation at Hearts a lot more in depth. I mean, we've got 10 minutes left of the show. I mean, one person who's not threw his name into the hat yet, there isn't an open vacancy, is there? But his name's not even been considered. But he's doing a great job since he's went in to step in for John Robertson up at Inverness Cally Thistle. Is Neil McCann. He's got a superb reaction from the team at Inverness Cally. Do you think that he's maybe due for another managerial role if Robo comes back in up at Inverness Cally?
He's certainly, he's always been sort of mentioned as somebody who Anne Budge rates. I'm sure he was interviewed before. It was before Stendhal got the job. I'm sure he got interviewed. So I certainly wouldn't be surprised if he was to come into the reckoning at any point in the future if Robbie was to leave. He's one of these guys that until recently he's probably a little bit tarnished by the Dundee reign, because people remember that he fell out with Scott Bain, who was obviously proven himself to be a good keeper, capable of going on and playing at Celtic. I don't think that did him any favours. But equally, I know Dundee fans who rate him as a manager and thought he was building something pretty impressive there, and if he had been given a bit more time, could have been a real success there. So, the work he's doing at Inverness at the moment is very eye-catching. They've won their last 4 games. They're unbeaten in 5, and they've hauled themselves. I know they had a lot of games in hand, but they've hauled themselves up from sort of the bottom 3, bottom 4, right into the playoff zone, and have a real chance of finishing in the top 4. And given the circumstances, the fact the manager, the actual manager, John Robertson, is had to take time off to deal with his own issues, and McCann's just stepped into the breach and sparked this upturn in the team's fortunes. He's certainly putting in a good audition if he was to become a contender for the Hearts job. I think he'd walk to Tynecastle if he was to get the chance to do it, because he's obviously got a long-term affiliation with the club, and I think he would love the opportunity to do it. So it's certainly if McInnes and Alex Neil are not the two sort of leading contenders, well, they are the leading contenders if the vacancy arose at the moment, but if those two were to disappear off the scene, then Neil McCann's name would come into the reckoning, I would suggest.
Yeah, Stephen, would you be happy with him if he was appointed as a Hearts supporter? Does he need more time maybe in a role like Cally first?
To be honest, I agree with what Anthony was saying in terms of his time at Dundee. I thought he was pretty harshly judged at the end of it, because look at some of the players he had. Glenn Kamara, who's now potentially been lobbied as the best midfield player in the country, was at Dundee and obviously ended up going to Rangers for 50 grand or 60 grand or whatever it be. He had Stephen Kolka, a guy who is now playing top level in Turkey, and an ex-England international. He had Scott Bain. He had a good team there, and he built most of that himself. So it's. I think he would be an interesting one. He would be right down my list in terms of potentials. But I mean, certainly, I wouldn't be massively disappointed if the other two candidates, the main two candidates, couldn't get the job. But for me, those two stand alone. I wouldn't even be discussing anybody else until those two are off the market or have said outright they're not interested.
Yeah, no, I'll be interested to see how that develops, and obviously we'll discuss it every week here on the Play On podcast. Obviously, we mentioned that Neil McCann's up at Inverness Cali. One person that's just went there on loan is Scott Allan. He wants to use that loan spell at Inverness Cali to prove that he's ready to start matches next season for parent club Hibs. He made a substitute appearance following his diagnosis with a heart condition. I mean, Allan says the move at Inverness says everything about his desire to get back playing. I mean that's just a great attitude, isn't it? And he is a great player, Anthony, isn't he?
Oh, he's a fantastic player on his day. Yeah, I know him very well. Really nice guy, and I just really hope he can get back to the level he was at before this situation arose. In terms of his move to Inverness, I noticed a lot of Hibs fans were sort of up in arms about it, suggesting he's the sort of player that we need to keep to unlock tight defences in the battle for Europe. And while I see that point of view, I think Allan's fitness will have deteriorated in terms of his match fitness. Will have taken more of a hit than you actually appreciate as a supporter. He'll probably not have felt like an athlete for a long time, in terms of it's all very well being fit, but there's a different level of fitness that a professional footballer has to get to. And with what he's been through, his natural sort of match fitness will have taken a huge hit to the point where, not that he can't be trusted, but you'd be doing him a disservice if you put him out to go and ask him to compete in a Premiership match where all his opponents are super fit, peak fitness, good match fitness levels, and he's way off it. He's probably at a level that when you've just come back for pre-season or whatever. I mean, maybe his fitness is better than I'm giving him credit for, but I would imagine with everything he's been through, he's not been doing a lot of training in that off period, and he will be in a position where he doesn't feel totally confident within himself because he's had this big issue. So drop him down a level, let him find his feet in a slightly less pressured environment where he's not got fans judging him every time he can't keep pace with somebody. Because that's what happens. It's a cruel world. Scott Allan comes on in a big game, gives the ball away, can't track back because his fitness isn't quite there. Supporters will say, he's finished, his health issues killed him off, get rid of him and all that. So you want him to be in the best possible shape when he's gone back into play regularly for Hibs, so that he can show the best of himself. So to me, it makes total sense to put him out on loan. And because I noticed Hibs fans were starting to moan because Jack Ross he was putting him on the bench, but not putting him on the pitch. And that's a clear sign that he's not quite ready to be pitched into the heat of battle. So yeah, put him out to somewhere. I'm not saying Inverness is not going to be a competitive level of football, but clearly the pressure and the expectation on the guy is not going to be the same as it would be at Hibs, where they're chasing their first third place finish in 16 years. So yeah, a logical move on all levels.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, since we were last on here as well, we've talked quite a bit about the outgoing manager at Aberdeen, Stephen, but the new income manager is ideal for the job at Aberdeen, says former teammate Rob Lee at Newcastle. Stephen Glass is the right candidate, he says. Obviously, Scott Brown has now come out and joined him. Do you think that they two will hit the ground running?
I think it's a very interesting appointment. I don't think it's one that captures the imagination massively unless you look at it as a sort of project team. What I found interesting was, I don't know whether it was just the wording in the statement that Scott Brown was coming in as a player coach rather than player assistant, which had been kind of lobbied before. I think the papers had been saying that he was coming in as the assistant. I think if that is the case, that he's got Scott Brown and Alan Russell as his kind of coaching team, and if he brings in even a mildly experienced assistant manager to kind of come in and work alongside them, I think that's got the makings of something decent. Scott Brown is an absolute no-brainer. Like, to get somebody like him that's going to come in there as a coach and a player that will just drive the standards. This is the problem that I've been talking about for the last 59 minutes about what Hearts have got. They don't seem to have anybody in that dressing room that's just not accepting of low par performances. And that's the one thing you can guarantee with Scott Brown. He will go into that Pittodrie dressing room, and if anybody gives 80, 85, 90% in a game, he will go through them like a ton of bricks, because he is used to 14 years at Celtic. He's used to nothing but winning. Like he's a natural born winner. So I think it's a no-brainer to have him involved. I mean, whether he'll be a good coach or not, we don't know. But I would put my money on him being pretty good and being involved in that setup. So it's exciting for Aberdeen, but maybe not in a way that they were expecting. I think they were probably looking at a high-profile big name, and they've got someone who is not a big name at all, but still, to me, could be an exciting prospect.
Absolutely. If we look at some of the fixtures happening this week, tomorrow night Raith Rovers are at home against Dunfermline. On Saturday it's Arbroath against Alloa, and Dunfermline are at home against Hearts in what should be a good game. See if Robbie bounces back. On Sunday, a very interesting encounter. Rangers are at home against Cove Rangers in the Cup, so that should be a good one. And I don't know if you're aware, but the Play On podcast, we've been covering the international games. We covered Scotland against Austria before kick-off, at half-time and at full-time. We did the same yesterday for the game in Israel, and we're going to be doing the same on Wednesday night before the kick-off, at half-time and at full-time against the Faroe Islands. Thanks to everybody who has partaken in tonight's show. Thanks for all the comments. Thanks to my colleagues Stephen Commons and Anthony Brown. If you're available on Wednesday night, we'd love to have you on board for our coverage against the Faroe Islands for Scotland. Thanks for watching, and if we don't see you on Wednesday, we'll see you next Monday for another episode of the Play On podcast.